Hello, and welcome to the second part of this three-part series for introducing my retirement roadmap. That again is Ty's retirement roadmap. I've got my website on the screen here, tyrollins.com. You can get a lot of information from there as well. So this part, second part, will focus on what I'm terming the major retirement components. These are 6 components. This part here can get might seem like, why do I need to listen to this? I think it's important, especially to talk about the first 2. And I categorize these. I think this is pretty close to what most people do from retirement financial planning. But I have come up with the names of these. I wanted to limit them to one word. So we've got fitness, legal, portfolio, income, taxes, and care. So, the first 2 are, in my opinion, in order of importance. The rest kind of have a more logical flow. So let's talk about fitness for a minute here. I'm really talking about physical fitness, and I say emotional or mental fitness, that type of thing. This is super important. However, in retirement financial planning, we really don't talk about it very much because it isn't. We aren't fitness instructors. We're not nutritionists, that sort of thing. But the reality is, we spend a lot of time focusing on money. Do we have enough? How do we get through this to make sure that we don't run out of it? But if we don't take care of our bodies, okay, and our minds, it can make retirement a lot more difficult. And even if a household has a ton of money for retirement, if the analogy is like, so for example, a lot of people when they retire, they go into the quote go-go years where they really want to do a lot of traveling, they want to check off that bucket list. That's super important. But if your body, if you're not healthy, getting on the airplane for those long flights or climbing on trails, that sort of thing, it can be very difficult. So the idea here is, for fitness, we do want to keep ourselves physically healthy, using good nutrition, etc. And even as we age, let's say we go from our go-go years to our slow-go and then our no-go years, really, it's so much better if we do have good health. And the situation here I do want to say is, it's funny because no matter how much money you have, I've heard this and I like it, no matter how much money you have, you cannot pay somebody else to go to the gym and lift weights for you. Okay? It doesn't work that way. You got to be involved. So physical fitness is important. I did want to say, as we age, and we're talking about retirement here, the most important thing, in my opinion, is our flexibility. Stretching, making sure and then our strength is super important, especially our core strength as we age. Cardio is still important, but it's certainly, like when I was much younger, I thought cardio was the only thing for me, and I threw in my weights, and that's kind of a secondary thing. But we have our physical fitness, and then we have this thing called brain health, right? A lot of us are worried about cognitive decline. I'm one of those people because I do have a history of that in my family. So I am very cognizant of the fact about cognitive decline. So the more I learn about this, the more research I do, and this does make sense, that if we keep our physical body in good health, our brain will be much healthier. So that's important. And that includes nutrition. It also includes getting good rest and sleep habits, that sort of thing. Also, from our brain perspective, there is a piece, let's call it 5%. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. But let's say about 5% of our brain needs to be exercised outside of lifting weights or whatever. And that is through, I've read this several times, just learning, studying new stuff that really stretches our brain and has to think about things. So, a good idea. Might as well do that, put it learning more about retirement and how to do financial planning, right, for retirement. Okay. The other piece I wanted to talk about fitness here is our emotional or our mental health. It's kind of funny because when people, as they get towards retirement, they're like, oh, this is gonna be so nice. I don't have to report to a job. I'm my own boss. I can just decide what I want to do, and it's gonna be wonderful. And a lot of people, I'm just gonna play golf and just relax. That lasts only a few months for most people, and then they're like, oh, what do I do? Why am I even getting up in the morning? What's the purpose? So you hear that meaning and purpose in retirement is super important. I've even heard studies, I read them, that said overall retirees have more depression than people who are not in retirement. And that's kind of a scary fact. Okay? You can go find some studies that talk about that. So I think it's really important that we pay particular attention to that in retirement. And again, there are lots of books and things that talk about meaning and purpose in retirement. I candidly, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing right here as a financial advisor. I retired, and I'm like, I love this stuff that I'm learning, and I've got some really great stuff that I've collected along the way, and I'm sharing it. So that talks about fitness. I know I went on a long time about that. And when you do a retirement financial plan with me or others, it isn't like we're going to be talking about this too much. There's no checklist. They're like, are you going to the gym? That sort of thing. People know what to do. It's kind of a separate area, but it is very much related to the success of our overall retirement. I'm going to move along to the second very, very important piece I call legal. Now, most financial planning, you'll hear this referred to as estate planning. I'm talking about, and I use the word legal because this is legal documentation that needs to be in place. I personally, through all the study and everything I have learned over the years, is that it's a very good idea for almost everyone to have a revocable trust in place. And I know some people are like, why would I want to do that? That's expensive. My needs are simple. Why can't I just get along with a will? I think, for the most part, every household should have a revocable trust. And some people call it a living revocable trust. You'll hear that. And why that's important, okay, is because that trust, and we see that word living, it also covers people while they are alive. And if a person becomes incapacitated, that trust has things built into it to take care of us while we're still living and possibly cannot take care of ourselves. So I find it very important. And you can do some very simple trusts. There are online ways of doing it that are much less expensive than talking to a estate planning attorney. I'm not saying, now there are families that's not going to be the case. You really do need to talk to an attorney. It's because probably your family situation is complex. You may have a special needs dependent that's going to need a lot of work when the trusts are set up. Or for households that have a significant amount of assets and they want to control how those assets go from the grave, that's where you really need a trust attorney. So my point is, it's not as, getting a trust in place is not as scary and involved as what most people, including myself, before I did it, realize. It's much simpler than it used to be, I would say, and less expensive for most people. The legal documentation includes the power of attorney for financials. Okay, so if you become incapacitated, you can take care of that. The other has your healthcare directive and your power of attorney for healthcare. Those are super important. You also, in preparing a trust, you also have a will that comes in place. Also, that the will only takes effect once you pass away. The trust is both before death and once you pass away, it takes care of things as well. Anyway, I think that's enough to talk about there. These two are very, very important, fitness and legal. I'm just going to now talk very briefly on the other 4 areas because they get way more discussion as we talk about the actual roadmap. Okay, so we talk about portfolio. This is a lot of, this is where the investments sit. This is what gets a lot of the attention. This is the most fun part. In my retirement roadmap, for better, for worse, that probably sounds a little more negative than I want it to be. But in my case, the portfolio becomes very, very simple. There's not a lot of complex investments. We'll talk more about that later. But it really, the portfolio part has the investments. What are your investments in stocks and bonds and cash? How's that put together? Okay. Then the next piece is talking about income. And these are, you can tell how these components are interrelated. Okay. We separate them, but they are dependent upon each other. Income, the biggest source of income for most people in retirement is Social Security. Super important. I'm going to resist the temptation to go into much detail on that, okay? But Social Security is there. Then we talk about an income, retirement income, or we can talk about this as our paychecks in retirement, our capacity, spending capacity. I like that as well. So we'll talk about that. That really is what a lot of people zero in on when they're trying to figure out if they can retire. What's the income going to be like? The next component of retirement are taxes. Here's something that's really interesting when it comes to retirement. Okay, so for most of our lives, at least the first parts of our lives, we're really saving for retirement, and we do it. And our taxes are fairly, I'd say, in comparison, are fairly straightforward. When we retire, taxes become far more important. It is just beyond expectations that taxes, how they really are very different when you are in retirement, because you are really need to focus on getting taxes to be as efficient as possible, or people can spend way more on taxes than they necessarily need to. I'm not talking about tax evasion. We're talking about tax avoidance, which the IRS is perfectly happy with avoiding, paying too much in taxes. Okay, so examples are Roth conversions, the IRMA. If you don't know what that is, we'll talk about that. RMDs, same thing. If you're not sure what those are, we'll be talking about those. And then tax efficiency and taxable accounts. So if you have a brokerage account where you're holding stocks or mutual funds or ETFs, that sort of thing, those can be very tricky. Okay, when it comes to taxes. So that's an important part of it. Finally, last category is care. We're talking about Medicare, healthcare, long-term healthcare, preparing for that. We're talking about housing in the long term. We're talking about reverse mortgages, that sort of thing. So that is the sixth and final major retirement component that I talk about. Anyway, I know this part here can seem a little bit tedious, but I think it's important, especially those first two, fitness and legal, that probably don't get enough attention during retirement financial planning. Thanks, and look forward to seeing you in the third and final piece of this introduction, which is really where the fun stuff hits, in my opinion. Thanks.